How did we decide to do this piece? That's a great question. I would say the kernel from this came from two people who I admire greatly. The first is Michael Beatty, who can't be with us today, and that is probably about 10 years ago, he introduced me to this piece. Emmanuel Music did a concert at the Shailin Liu Performing Arts Center in Rockport, and it was sort of a Baroque sampler. And we ended the first half with the first chorus from the first act of Resurrezione, and I had really not been that aware of the piece. And Michael put that bug in my ear about 10 years ago, saying, this is a piece Emmanuel should do. Um, and the other person that sort of inspired me to choose this piece unknowingly was Nathan, because of his amazing stage direction of the Britain Chamber series, where he sort of brought to life so much of the sanctuary that I guess we knew existed, but we didn't know it existed in that way and what was possible as it related to video. And I remember having a conversation with Brad toward the end of that Britain filming, standing in the sanctuary and saying, ah, I know what I want to do. I want to do La Resurrezione. I want to stage it and I want to put it underneath this Emmanuel Land window. Trying to do this with masked singers, I'm so used to, even after however many cantatas we've done, one of the things I love doing when I conduct opera is watching singers' mouths and lining up what I'm doing with watching how they're forming their consonants. And that wasn't an option. And also, much of the show, I had my back to them. It was more important for Michael to be able to see the singers doing the recitatives than me conducting. So, having my back to them much of the time, the distance that they were moving around the sanctuary, it's actually, I think, kind of amazing that we were able to pull it off. There were a number of times in the staging rehearsals I thought, oh, Nathan, this isn't going to work. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. And it's a tribute to our players that we might have happened, and Nathan somehow knew it would work.
I guess I'm glad we didn't talk because I don't think you said that to me. I would have been really
No, I
nervous. So
didn't.
I'm like,
I didn't.
they, they,
It was such a unique experience because, as Nathan said, we were trying to put something that was felt like a live performance, but not shot from one viewpoint with all these different cameras. And of course, because it's recorded, we wanted the musical product to be as good as it could be, but also didn't want it to be so over engineered and obsessing about, oh, you know, can I get another crack at that one little run or something like that? In fact, I was incredibly cautious about not saying anything to the singers really ever about what they did because singers are by nature, and I can say this because I'm one myself, we are incredibly critical. And if we had the opportunity to do something again, you'd never end because you'd keep doing it over and over again until you got it exactly right. So most of the fixes, I would say, were for ensemble issues.
I think one thing that did come up from this too, though, that we learned from already this year was going from the Goldberg to the Britain to now. One thing we haven't talked about actually is the tremendous work of Tom Stevenson and the audio recording that went on, and the fact that with the social distancing that needed to happen, every single player was individually mic'd with at least one microphone, and so Tom had over 36 lines coming into his setup, and all the singers were on individual wireless microphones that he, had this new system he developed to have them all, because we said they're going to be moving around too much, they need to be clipped, they can't just be on booms. So that's just one aspect of this we haven't talked about as much, that amount of balancing that needed to happen, and the process that Ryan and Tom just finished going through kind of at high speed this week in 36 hours, kind of editing the entire thing musically.
So Michael met early on with all the singers and prepared their recitatives since he was going to be the one that had to follow them. And unlike what we're so used to doing at Emmanuel, Bach recitatives, which are, while harmonically adventurous and challenging, rhythmically are predictable and you sort of approach them as they are on the page. With Handel recitative, it's much more speech-like, and moving through rests and pacing is determined by the singer and the harpsichordist together. So that connection and collaboration was was really important. We had a rather large continuo group. So we had Michael doubling on organ and harpsichord. We had two theorbos, the long-necked lutes, and we had also a cellist, and we had a gambist as well. So there were a lot of sort of orchestration decisions that were made as it relates to the recitatives, especially for who was going to be playing them, to try to give us a varied color palette and to try to always. Sometimes we would identify one singer with a certain instrument. For example, the angel often, almost always, was accompanied by organ alone. The role of Mary Cleophas is, in many ways, well, incredibly vocally complex and difficult. The role, especially the aria in the first act, Naufragando, which is some of the most rapid fire melismas that you'll ever hear. And it goes like the wind. And it was written for a contralto, so not a mezzo, but a contralto, a low voice. And we didn't, we felt that would be best sung by a countertenor. And Chris Lowry, who is based out of Providence, but has done a lot of work in overseas, was available. Thank goodness, because he was here due to a lot of other opportunities being canceled. Was able to do the role, and I mean, and nailed it. Now, in terms of there being any precedents, I mean, we have numerous examples in opera about what we call pants roles, right? Women playing male characters. So I think the discussion we had was, why couldn't a male play a female character? Um, the way he creates sounds with what really is relatively economic forces. We're not talking, I mean, 24 players isn't much. Now, granted, when Handel first did this, I read somewhere he had a string section of like 39 players or something outrageously elaborate, which would have never worked for us. But there's this fantastic moment in one of the Maddalena's arias toward the end where she basically makes the decision to go find Jesus. And there is this chromatic passage that is two recorders and oboe in unison. And the oboe is actually muted, which you very seldom see a marking for a muted oboe, and in unison with the recorder. In fact, Peggy Pearson was saying that's the first time I've ever done anything like that before. So the sort of unique sound worlds that he could come up with, there was a moment of two recorders and muted strings, which was there to depict a bird's wings flapping. He was really creating, and he was painting a musical picture.
It was about a 3-week run in a lot of ways. It started with Michael really coaching Recit. And Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Michael took charge to start, and he actually did most of those Recit coachings, or all of those Recit coachings, over Zoom, because that worked really well for Recit, where he could just roll a chord, and then the singer sings, and then he rolled the next chord. A little more complicated than that, but he could at least get the coachings in. And so it was great to have that. Then we shifted into in-person music rehearsals for a few days, which started to blur the lines of those became staging rehearsals with Nathan while still working on music at the same time. Then a series of orchestra-only rehearsals, which then added the singers in alongside them, putting the staging up on its feet, getting the video teams in to watch and observe, getting lighting up. And then we filmed over 4 nights. And we needed to do nighttime specifically to keep lighting consistent, because we can't light or control the light during the day. So we had to wait until about 7:30 was why we called that. And it also helped us avoid the construction noise next door of the recording session, which we ran into with Goldberg a little bit, or some of our other things. So it was a 3-week process, though, which is incredibly condensed compared to a normal opera or film process.
What I love about doing, and now we've been calling this an opera, of course, it was an oratorio. It was never intended to necessarily be staged, but I think the story lends itself to it, and so we were able to make something happen. But the characters and the way they relate to one another, especially the relationship between the angel and the devil, Angelo and Lucifer, And when we see the vulnerabilities of the devil, that he's not all evil, but there's, as slimy as he is, he's also almost human in a way. And I'm sure, Nathan, you can say more about that. But in the way David McFerrin was able to approach that musically and find, you know, a soft spot, as it were, for a rather oleaginous character in the devil, I found really touching. And the relationship between the two Marys, and then the music that John sings. I often think of tenor roles in Handel operas and oratorios to have some sort of heroicism to them, some, virtuosic, athletic type of aria. And almost without exception, everything in this role is full of warmth and lyricism that I don't think we had heard in Handel's output up to this point.
The show is still being edited right now. It's actually we haven't seen a first draft yet, which I'm not truly worried about. I know that seems a little scary. We've seen parts of things. We'll get our first draft at end of day tomorrow, and then Nathan and I will review. Nathan will review, and that's where I think Nathan actually gets to come back in and put the director hat on, and look at things and see how they line up and what angles are missing or what he expected to see. So that's, in my mind, I'm still managing timelines, deadlines, and workflows for an editing team. Things like titles at the beginning and credits at the end, copy things, all that kind of stuff is being worked through because we keep timelines tight in COVID time at Emmanuel.